Try this test. If you woke up tomorrow in a new country, you wouldn't ask, is it capitalist or socialist? You would ask three quieter questions. Who owns the major assets? Who sets prices and wages? And who pays when projects fail? Answer those, and the slogans evaporate. That is the promise here. In the next 10 minutes, you'll get a simple framework for what each system did well, where each broke, and why most societies ended up blending the two. Start with clean definitions, stripped of cheerleading. Capitalism means most productive assets are privately owned, investment decisions are decentralized, and prices mostly emerge from markets. Socialism means the public, usually through the state, owns a large share of productive assets and allocates investment through planning or political direction, often guiding prices and wages as well. In real life, pure versions are rare. Most countries are mixed. The question is not which label wins. The question is which mechanisms produce growth, stability, innovation, and dignity. And what trade-offs appear. Scene 1. A 19th century factory town. Smokestacks, crowded streets, long shifts. Early industrial capitalism delivered a genuine miracle. Output surged, railways spread. New machines multiplied productivity. When profit signals were clear, capital rushed toward invention and scale. But here's the twist. The same system also produced brutal working conditions, child labor, unsafe mills, and recurring financial panics. Markets rewarded speed, not safety. Pollution was free. If you didn't regulate the damage compounded. So capitalism's first strength is dynamism. Its first weakness is that costs can be pushed onto workers, cities, and the future unless rules force firms to pay them. Now, scene 2, a ration line in the early 20th century. Not because people are lazy, because the state is trying to allocate scarce goods, often after war or revolution. Socialism rose from 2. Pressures, moral outrage at exploitation, and fear of chaos in boom and bust markets. It promised security, work, housing, education, and a sense that the commanding heights served the public. What actually worked? In some places, state direction achieved rapid industrial build-out. When a government controls investment, it can concentrate resources on steel, power, rail, and military production. It can raise literacy quickly. It can build clinics and schools in regions that private capital ignored. Now, the part most people miss, those gains came with structural difficulties that were not fixed by better speeches. Comprehensive planning struggles with information. A modern economy produces millions of signals every day. What people want, which inputs are scarce, where quality is poor, which factories waste material. Markets compress much of that into prices and profit and loss feedback. Planners must approximate it through reports, quotas, and committees. That produces predictable distortions. Managers learn to hit targets, not delight customers. Factories can meet a tonnage goal while producing the wrong sizes. Shortages become normal. Queues become a substitute for prices. And because failure can be political, experimentation shrinks. Innovation still happens in priority sectors, defense, heavy industry, sometimes space, but everyday consumer quality often lags. A useful scene is a state shoe factory. The quota is pairs produced, so the manager makes heavy identical boots. The quota is met. Citizens still want comfortable shoes in different sizes. In a market, unsold inventory is a warning. In a plan, inventory can be hidden, and the warning arrives late. Another scene. A planner's office full of charts. A local manager reports success because failure is punished. The center receives good news, so it repeats the same plan. This is the soft underbelly of planning. Bad information flows upward, and mistakes become permanent. There is also the power problem. When the same authority controls jobs, housing, and police, dissent becomes expensive. This isn't a moral lecture. It is an incentive structure. Concentrated economic control can turn politics into a fight over survival. So, socialism's first strength is mobilization and baseline security. Its first weakness is information loss, and the risks of concentrated power. Now swing back to capitalism in the 20th century, because it didn't stay raw. Here is where the story gets interesting. After the Great Depression, many market economies added guardrails, deposit insurance, bank supervision, labor standards, pensions, unemployment support, public schooling, and, in many places, broad healthcare access. They did not abolish markets. They civilized them. Picture a central bank office in the 1930s, sober men studying bank runs, deciding that cash withdrawals cannot be the end of the system. Deposit insurance and lender of last resort tools are built so a panic doesn't destroy healthy firms. That is not ideology. That is learning. But here's the twist. These guardrails were not small. They changed the feel of capitalism. When a worker is not one injury away from ruin, they can switch jobs, retrain, start a business, or negotiate. Social insurance can increase dynamism by reducing fear. This leads to a practical lesson. Capitalism is powerful at discovery, finding better ways to produce and distribute. But it is weak at insurance, spreading risks people cannot reasonably bear alone. Socialism, or more precisely public provision, is powerful at insurance. But it can be weak at discovery when it smothers competition and feedback. Consider a simple contrast. In a competitive market for shoes, dozens of firms can try new designs. Most fail, a few succeed. Quality rises. That's discovery. Now consider disaster relief after a flood. You don't want a bidding war for rescue boats. You want coordination, speed, and universal coverage. That's insurance and public capacity. Now, where does capitalism fail even with markets? Watch the who pays when it fails question. In a hard market, bad firms go bankrupt. Their assets are sold. Their managers lose control. That harshness is also a discipline. In many state systems, failing enterprises can be rescued indefinitely because unemployment is politically dangerous. Economists call this a soft budget constraint. The cost is hidden. Resources keep flowing to weak projects, and productivity drifts downward. But here's another twist. Capitalism can develop its own soft budget constraints when finance and politics merge. If banks become too big to fail, losses get socialized while profits stay private. The system looks like a market in good times and like public insurance in crises, without the fairness of deliberate design. That is why the 2008 financial crisis matters in this story. It wasn't a failure of markets to exist. It was a failure of markets to discipline risk in real time and a failure of regulators to see leverage building. When the crash came, the public sector stabilized the system because letting it burn would have destroyed millions of innocent households. Again, not ideology, but triage. Now, what about the famous Nordic model? Many people mislabel it. These countries have private ownership, entrepreneurs, and global firms. What they also have is high taxes, competent administration, and strong public services. The mechanism is not central planning. It is markets generating wealth, and a state redistributing risk and investing in human capital. But that model depends on institutions. High taxes only work when collection is reliable, corruption is low, and services are delivered well. Without that, you get the worst of both: heavy burdens and weak benefits. There is a third path that complicates the debate: the developmental state. Think of post-war Japan and later South Korea and Taiwan. These were not socialist command economies, but neither were they laissez-faire. Private firms competed, but the state guided credit, protected infant industries, and demanded export performance. The key was accountability. Subsidies were conditional, and failure could still mean collapse. Planning worked best when it used markets as a test. China forces another honest distinction. For decades, heavy planning produced severe inefficiencies and hardship. Later, market reforms introduced competition and profit incentives, while the state retained strong direction in key sectors. Growth accelerated. Poverty fell. But political control remained tight, and the system carries its own risks: misallocation when targets replace feedback, and vulnerability when power is concentrated. So what worked across cases? Three things show up again and again. First, markets work well for information and incentives. Prices, when allowed to move, signal scarcity. Profit rewards efficiency. Loss punishes waste. Competition pressures firms to improve. Second, public systems work well for foundations and risk pooling. Basic education, public health, core infrastructure, and safety nets raise productivity and social stability. Many of these investments have spillovers private firms underprovide. Third, rules are decisive. The same market economy can look like an open game or a rigged one. Antitrust determines whether profits come from serving customers or blocking competitors. Labor rules determine whether growth lifts wages or only asset owners. Financial regulation determines whether credit funds factories and skills or mainly inflates bubbles. A quick scene shows why rules matter. In an antitrust courtroom, a judge studies whether one firm has bought every competitor. If monopoly wins, prices stop being signals and become tolls. Consumers pay more, startups die, and innovation slows. Without any conspiracy, just the math of market power. And price controls show the mirror problem. Freeze the price of bread below the cost of flour and ovens, and you don't get cheap bread. You get empty shelves, ration cards, and a back-alley market where the real price returns in secret. The mechanism is the same in any system. When official prices ignore scarcity, scarcity expresses itself through cues and favors. Post-war West Germany is a useful middle example. It rebuilt with competitive markets, but paired them with strong institutions, worker representation, and a safety net. It showed a market economy can be productive and socially anchored when rules are clear and corruption is low when finance is kept from running wild. Here is where everything breaks: when either system loses accountability. In capitalism, that often appears as monopoly, cronyism, or financial excess. If firms become too powerful, they raise prices, suppress innovation, and capture politics. If credit expands without discipline, booms turn into crashes, and ordinary households pay the bill. In socialism, the breakdown often appears as falsified reporting, stagnation, and political coercion. When planners cannot measure reality honestly, shortages worsen. When citizens cannot exit bad policies, errors persist longer and cost more. So the best question is not capitalism or socialism. The best question is, which mix produces learning without cruelty? A useful mental model is to separate the economy into zones. Zone 1. Competitive markets where choice and innovation matter, most consumer goods, many services, much manufacturing. Here, private ownership and competition tend to outperform bureaucracy. Zone 2. Natural monopolies and essential networks, electric grids, water systems, basic transport corridors. Here, you need regulation or public ownership to prevent abuse. Zone 3. Universal capabilities, education, basic healthcare, public health, and rule of law. These are not luxuries, they are productivity engines. Countries that treat them as investments usually grow stronger. Zone 4. Stabilization, central banking, lender of last resort functions, and fiscal capacity to cushion recessions. Without these, downturns become social fractures. This is not ideology, it is engineering. So, what did not work? Pure, comprehensive central planning at national scale struggled to sustain quality, flexibility, and innovation. And pure, unregulated capitalism repeatedly produced harsh labor conditions, instability, and inequality that eventually triggered backlash and reform. What worked best was a hybrid: markets for discovery, public systems for insurance, and firm rules to keep power from concentrating and risk from exploding. Takeaway checklist. When you evaluate any country, ask, who owns the major assets, and can new firms challenge incumbents? Do prices and wages carry real information, or are they frozen and distorted? Where do profits come from? Innovation or privilege? How is risk shared, through safety nets and public services, or through personal ruin? And when mistakes happen, can the system admit them, learn, and change course? If you can answer those, you can see past the labels, and you can predict which systems will adapt under stress and which will harden until they crack. Next episode, we'll apply this framework to a single dramatic case, a society that tried to run an economy by command and discovered that without honest prices, even good intentions can create scarcity.